When we think of the German soul, we think of the forest. We imagine a lineage of fierce, flaxen-haired warriors emerging from the dense canopy of the Hercynian wood to defy the Roman Empire. A people defined by the Germanic label, a term that has become synonymous with a specific biological and cultural archetype. We have been taught that to be German is to be the descendant of those Iron Age tribes, the Suebi, the Alamanni, the Saxons. But the image of a pure monolithic Germanic origin is a ghost. It is a Victorian invention, layered over a much more chaotic, much more ancient reality. If you were to peel back the layers of a modern German's DNA, you wouldn't find a singular tribe of warriors. Instead, you would find a palimpsest, a document erased and rewritten so many times that the original ink is almost impossible to find. The contradiction lies in the name itself. German is a word the people it describes never actually used for themselves. It was a label imposed by outsiders, most famously by Julius Caesar, to categorize a messy frontier of diverse peoples who shared little more than a proximity to the Rhine. Today, we are discovering that the people living in the heart of Europe are not the biological Germanics of our history books. They are something far older, far more migratory, and far more complex. The story of Germany is not a story of isolation. It is a story of a crossroads where the ghosts of Anatolian farmers, steppe riders, and lost Paleolithic hunters collide. For centuries, the narrative was simple. The Germanic tribes were the indigenous force of Central Europe. This belief fueled empires and shaped the modern geopolitical map. It provided a sense of rootedness, a feeling that the land and the blood were one and the same. But this is where the myth begins to fracture. When we look at the actual genetic signatures of Central Europe, we realize that the Germanic identity is a cultural mask worn by a population whose biological roots reach in directions no one expected. The map of humanity wasn't written in a lab. It was carved by the sea and the stone. This is Helix Horizon, where we trace the code that refuses to stay still. To understand why the German myth is so resilient, we have to look at the moment it was born. In 9 AD, in the damp shadows of the Teutoburg forest, 3 Roman legions were annihilated by a coalition of tribes led by Arminius. To the Romans, this was a clash with a barbarian other. To later historians, it was the birth of the German nation. But the men fighting under Arminius weren't a single race. They were a fragmented collection of clans with different origins, different dialects, and different fates. By centering the entirety of German history on this one Germanic moment, we have ignored the 90% of the story that happened before the first sword was even forged. The deeper we go, the more the labels dissolve. If we go back 5,000 years, the Germanic person doesn't exist. Instead, the landscape of Central Europe was a battleground of DNA. The arrival of the Corded Ware Culture, a massive influx of people from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, didn't just bring new tools, it brought a genetic upheaval so profound that it replaced nearly 75% of the existing population in some areas. These were the people who brought the Indo-European languages that would eventually evolve into German, but they weren't Germanic yet. They were nomads, pioneers, and opportunists. What we call German today is actually the result of a slow-motion collision between these steppe invaders and the Neolithic farmers who had arrived from the Near East thousands of years prior. But this discovery revealed a hidden cost to our modern identity. By clinging to the Germanic label, we have effectively erased the memory of the people who were there first. Before the first Germanic word was ever spoken, the plains of Germany were home to the LBK culture, the linear pottery people. They were the ones who cleared the forests, who built the first longhouses, and who established the foundations of European agriculture.
For a long time, it was assumed they were simply swept away by the more virile Germanic tribes. Science, however, tells a different story. Their blood still flows in the modern German population, hidden beneath the linguistic and cultural dominance of those who came later. The Germanic identity is a thin veneer over a much deeper, much more diverse biological heritage. The shift from the Neolithic to the Bronze Age in Central Europe was not a quiet transition. It was a genetic rupture. As we move deeper into the molecular record, the image of the stable German ancestor vanishes. Between 2800 and 2500 BC, the arrival of the Corded Ware Culture, a massive influx of people from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, fundamentally re-engineered the human landscape. These were the Yamnaya-descended pastoralists, a people whose mobility was fueled by the domestication of the horse and the invention of the wheel. When they arrived in the North European plain, they didn't just bring bronze, they brought a specific paternal signature, the RB and RA haplogroups, that would come to dominate Western and Central Europe. This is the point where the Germanic myth often claims its origin, but the science complicates the timeline. While these steppe migrants provided the linguistic and paternal foundations for what we now call Germanic, they weren't a localized German group. They were a pan-European force. The same genetic components that define a modern Bavarian were at that time being distributed from the Russian steppe to the British Isles. To call these people Germanic is an anachronism. It's like a block of marble, a finished statue, before the first chisel has even touched the stone. The specific Germanic character didn't emerge from a single source, but from a localized pressure cooker of environmental and social isolation that wouldn't occur for another 2 millennia.
What scientists expected next was a linear progression from these steppe migrants to the tribes described by Roman historians. But the data revealed a sudden and mysterious stagnation. For over 1,000 years during the Nordic Bronze Age, the population in what is now northern Germany and Scandinavia remained remarkably genetically stable, yet culturally distinct from the Germanic archetype we recognize. They were a maritime-focused society, obsessed with solar symbols and elaborate burials, living in a world that felt more like the Homeric Mediterranean than the dark, forested Germania of Caesar's imagination. They were the silent ancestors, the biological bridge, but they lacked the one thing that truly defines a people in the eyes of history: a unified linguistic identity. And this is where the story stops being about them and starts being about the power of language to rewrite biology. Around 500 BC, a linguistic shift known as Grimm's Law began to take hold. It was a systematic change in how consonants were pronounced, separating the Proto-Dramatic speakers from their Indo-European cousins, like the Celts and the Italics. This wasn't a genetic event, it was a cultural contagion. You didn't need new DNA to become Germanic, you just needed to change the way you spoke. This realization shatters the idea of the Germanic person as a biological race. Instead, Germanic was an elite cultural package that spread across diverse genetic backgrounds, absorbing remnants of the old hunter-gatherer populations and the Anatolian farmers who had survived the steppe transition. The irony of German history is that the very people who were hailed as the purest examples of the Germanic type, those in the north and east, often carry the highest proportions of pre-Germanic ancestry. Genetics reveals that as the Germanic tribes expanded south during the migration period, they didn't replace the people they conquered, they layered themselves on top of them. In southern Germany, the genetic profile is heavily weighted toward the Romanized Celts, who lived there for centuries. These people didn't vanish, they simply started speaking the language of the new arrivals. They changed their clothes, their gods, and their names, but their DNA remained tethered to the Alpine valleys and the Rhine. We see this most clearly when we look at the Roman frontier. For centuries, the Rhine was viewed as a hard border between civilization and barbarism, between Roman and German. But the archaeology of the Limes tells a different story. It was a porous membrane. DNA from Roman-era graves in Germany shows a staggering array of origins. North Africans, Levantines, and Iberians living alongside local Germanic tribes. The German of the Roman era was already a cosmopolitan blend. The myth of the isolated forest-dwelling warrior was a literary trope used by Roman writers like Tacitus to critique the perceived decadence of Rome. He wasn't writing a census, he was writing a moral fable. And we, centuries later, mistook that fable for a genetic blueprint. But this discovery revealed a hidden cost to the way we interpret our own history. If Germanic is a language and a culture rather than a biological reality, then what happens to the concept of the homeland? The genetic data shows that the modern German genome is actually more similar to its neighbors in the Netherlands, Denmark, and even parts of France than it is to the idealized Germanic tribes of the past. The borders we see on a map are invisible to the genome. The deep time of Central Europe is a story of constant restless movement, a conveyor belt of populations that never truly stopped. The deeper we probe into the migration period, the Volkerwanderung, the more the concept of a Germanic heartland begins to look like a mirage. Between the 4th and 5th centuries AD, the map of Europe was effectively put into a blender. Goths, Vandals, Franks, and Lombards moved across the continent in a series of demographic shocks. But here is the genetic twist. While these groups moved as political entities, they were not monolithic biological ones. Modern genomic sampling of burials from this era shows that a Frankish warband might include individuals with local Gallo-Roman ancestry, while a Lombard cemetery in Pannonia reveals a mix of Northern European and Mediterranean signatures. The tribes were not races on the move, they were mobile confederations, multi-ethnic engines of war and survival. This challenges the very foundation of how identity is built. We tend to think of migration as a simple A replaces B scenario. But in the heart of Germany, the genetic data suggests an integration and assimilation model. When the Franks expanded their empire, they didn't commit a biological erasure of the existing populations. Instead, they acted as a cultural glue. A person living in the Rhineland 1500 years ago might have transitioned from being a Roman citizen to a Frankish subject in a single generation. Their DNA didn't change, but their world did. This reveals a fundamental truth about human history. Culture moves at the speed of a horse, while genetics moves at the speed of a generation. What scientists expected next was that the modern German genome would reflect these famous tribal movements in clear, localized clusters. One might expect to find Saxon DNA in the north and Alamannic DNA in the south, but the molecular reality is frustratingly blurred. Centuries of internal migration, religious wars, and the sheer density of the European population have smoothed out the edges. If you look at a genetic map of Europe today, Germany doesn't stand out as a unique island. Instead, it sits at the center of a Central European genetic continuum. There is no hard line where Germanic DNA ends and Slavic or Celtic DNA begins. It is a gradient, a spectrum of shared ancestry that makes the concept of a pure German origin scientifically illiterate.
This brings us to one of the most provocative revelations of modern archaeogenetics, the East-West divide. For much of the 20th century, the distinction between Germanic and Slavic peoples was treated as a deep, ancient chasm. Yet, genetic analysis of individuals from the medieval period reveals that the medieval expansion into the East, the Ostsiedlung, was not a one-way street. There was profound genetic mixing between Germanic-speaking settlers and Slavic-speaking locals. Today, many Germans in the eastern states carry significant percentages of ancestry that is indistinguishable from their Polish or Czech neighbors. The Iron Curtain of the mind has no basis in the blood. We have spent centuries killing each other over differences that, at a molecular level, barely exist. But this discovery revealed a hidden cost to our modern obsession with ancestry. When we use DNA tests to find out how Germanic we are,
We are asking a question that the genome isn't designed to answer. A test might tell you that you have Northwestern European markers, but it cannot tell you if those markers came from a Viking raider, a Roman soldier, or a Neolithic farmer who never left his village. We are trying to use a 21st century tool to validate a 19th century myth. The Germanic origin isn't a point on a map or a sequence of nucleotides. It is a story we told ourselves to make sense of a chaotic past. And this is where the story stops being about the Germans and starts being about the nature of the human species. The German genome is a testament to the fact that humans are, by nature, mongrels. We are a species of admixture. Every time a new group arrived in Central Europe, whether they were hunters following the retreating glaciers, farmers from the Levant, or horsemen from the steppe, they didn't just bring new genes, they brought new ways of being. The German identity survived not because it was pure, but because it was adaptable. It was a vessel that could hold the DNA of 1,000 different ancestors and still call itself a single people. The fluidity of this identity is perhaps most visible in the Germanic languages themselves. Linguists have long noted that Proto-Germanic contains a significant layer of substrate words, terms for fish, maritime life, and social structures that have no Indo-European root. This suggests that when the first Germanic speakers moved into Northern Europe, they didn't just meet a void, they met a ghost population of indigenous Europeans who had lived there since the end of the last ice age. These lost people were absorbed. They gave up their tongue, but they forced their new masters to adopt their vocabulary. They survived in the very words Germans use today to describe the sea and the earth. This leads us to a startling conclusion. The German people did not move into Germany. Rather, Germany moved into the people. The geography of the heartland of Europe, the Rhine, the Danube, and the Baltic coast, acted as a mold. No matter who poured into that mold, whether they came from the steppe or the Mediterranean, the environmental and social pressures of Central Europe eventually shaped them into a recognizable cultural unit. The German identity is not a lineage, it is an ecological and historical result. If we look at the genetic clusters of modern Germany, we see the remnants of these ancient crossroads. In the north, there is a stronger affinity with the Scandinavian and Dutch populations, reflecting the old maritime world of the North Sea. In the south and west, the genetic legacy of the Celtic Latène culture and the Roman Empire remains surprisingly robust. In the east, the Slavic contribution is undeniable. Yet, all these people call themselves German. This proves that a nation is not a biological fact, but a collective act of will. It is a shared memory that chooses to ignore the chaotic diversity of its own bloodline in favor of a unified story. But this discovery revealed a hidden cost to our modern definitions of home. If the people we call Germanic were actually a blend of Anatolian farmers, steppe nomads, and Paleolithic hunters, then the concept of an ancestral land becomes a moving target. Humanity has always been a species in motion. The idea of a population being native to a specific patch of dirt is only true if you start the clock at a very specific, arbitrary moment in history. If you move the clock back 500 years, the map changes. Move it back 5,000, and it vanishes entirely. We are left with a reality that is far more fascinating than the myths of the 19th century. The German people are not a relic of the Iron Age. They are a living laboratory of European history. Their DNA contains the record of every major migration, every conquest, and every climate shift that has hit the continent for the last 10,000 years. To look at a German genome is to look at a map of Europe's entire struggle for survival. It is a story of resilience through assimilation, not through isolation. And this is where the story stops being about a single nation and starts being about the universal human code. We have spent centuries looking for what divides us, using genetics as a tool to draw borders and define others. But the more we sequence, the more we find that the borders are entirely in our minds. The German experience shows us that a people can have a powerful, distinct identity while being biologically indistinguishable from their rivals. It suggests that our culture is not something we inherit in ourselves, but something we build together in our lives.
The question then remains, if the Germanic identity was a mask that could be worn by anyone from a Roman veteran to a Slavic farmer, what other masks are we currently wearing? If the people of the Rhine are not who they thought they were, who are we? The search for the pure origin of any people is a journey toward a destination that doesn't exist. Instead, we are left with a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to a time when there were no nations, only the restless movement of a species trying to find its place in a changing world. Is it possible that the very idea of a distinct population is just a temporary snapshot of a much larger, ongoing migration? If the map of humanity is never static, what does that mean for the futures we are building today? As we look toward the edges of the map, we find another enigma, a people who, unlike the Germans, seem to have stood still while the rest of the world moved around them. In the high valleys of the Pyrenees, a different kind of code was written, one that resisted the steppe, the Romans, and the tides of time. But as we've seen, standing still is often its own kind of transformation. The myth of the Germanic warrior is a compelling ghost, but the molecular reality is far more profound. Germany is not a fortress of ancient blood. It is Europe's greatest intersection. Its people are a living archive, carrying the genetic echoes of Anatolian pioneers, steppe riders, and the silent hunters who watched the glaciers retreat. They remind us that identity is not a biological inheritance passed down in a vacuum, but a story we choose to tell ourselves, a cultural flame tended by whoever happens to be standing in the hearth. The map of our ancestors is not a set of borders, but a series of overlapping waves. To be Germanic was never about a sequence of DNA. It was a way of speaking, a way of dreaming, and a way of surviving in the heart of a restless continent. As we peel back these layers, we find that the further we look for them, the more we find us, a species defined not by where we started, but by the relentless, beautiful chaos of our mingling. But if the center of Europe is a crossroads where everyone eventually becomes one, what happens at the edges? What of the isolated valleys and the high peaks where the waves of migration supposedly broke and fell back? To understand the true power of the human wanderlust, we must look to the ones who refused to move and the secrets they guarded in the silence of the stone.